The History of Rome, by Titus Livius, Livy. Book 2. Secessions of the Plebs, the Origin of the Tribunes and Coriolanus. 28. Then Aulus Virginius and Titus Vitusius enter on the consulship. Upon this the commons, uncertain what sort of consuls they were to have, held nightly meetings, some of them upon the Esquiline, and others upon the Aventine Hill, that they might not be confused by hasty resolutions in the forum, or take their measures inconsiderately and without concert. The consuls, judging this proceeding to be of dangerous tendency, as it really was, laid the matter before the Senate. But they were not allowed after proposing it to take the votes regularly, so tumultuously was it received on all sides by the clamours and indignation of the fathers, at the consuls throwing on the Senate the odium of that which should have been put down by consular authority. That if there really were magistrates in the Republic, there would have been no council in Rome but the public one. That the Republic was now divided and split into 1,000 Senate houses and assemblies, some of which were held on the Esquiline, others on the Aventine Hill. That one man, in truth such as Appius Claudius, for that was more than a consul, would in a moment disperse these private meetings. When the consuls, thus rebuked, asked them, what they desired them to do, for that they would act with as much energy and vigour as the senators wished, they resolved that they should push on the levies as briskly as possible, that the people would become insolent from want of employment. When the house broke up, the consuls ascend the tribunal and summoned the young men by name. But none of them made any answer, and the people crowding round them, as if in a general assembly, said, that the people would no longer be imposed on. They should never list one soldier till the public faith was made good. That liberty should be restored to each before arms were given, that they might fight for their country and fellow citizens, and not for arbitrary lords. The consuls fully understood the orders they had received from the Senate, but they saw none of those who had talked so big within the walls of the Senate House present themselves to take any share with them in the public odium. A desperate contest with the commons seemed at hand. Therefore, before they would have recourse to extremities, they thought it advisable to consult the Senate a second time. Then indeed the younger senators flocked in a hurry round the chairs of the consuls, commanding them to abdicate the consulate and resign an office which they had not courage to support. 29. Having sufficiently tried both ways, the consuls at length said, Conscript fathers, lest you may say that you were not forewarned, a great disturbance is at hand. We require that they who accuse us most severely of cowardice would assist us in raising the levies. We shall proceed according to the resolution of the most intrepid amongst you, since it so pleases you. They returned to their tribunal, and on purpose commanded one of the most factious of the people, who stood in their view, to be called upon by name. When he stood mute, and a number of men stood round him in a ring, to prevent his being seized, the consuls sent a lictor to him. He being repulsed, such of the fathers as attended the consuls, exclaiming against it as an intolerable insult, ran in a hurry from the tribunal to assist the lictor. But when the violence was turned from the lictor, who suffered nothing else but being prevented from seizing him, against the fathers, the riot was quelled by the interposition of the consuls, in which, however, without stones or weapons, there was more noise and angry words than mischief done. The Senate, called in a tumultuous manner, is consulted in a manner still more tumultuous, such as had been beaten, calling out for an inquiry, and the most violent members declaring their sentiments no less by clamours and noise than by their votes. At length, when their passion had subsided, the consuls reproaching them with there being as much disorderly conduct in the Senate as in the Forum, the House began to vote in regular order. There were 3 different opinions. Publius Virginius did not make the matter general. He voted that they should consider only those who, relying on the promise of Publius Servilius the consul, had served in a war against the Auruncans and Sabines. Titius Largius was of opinion that it was not now a proper time to reward services only, that all the people were immersed in debt, and that a stop could not be put to the evil unless measures were adopted for all, and that if the condition of different parties be different, the divisions would rather be thereby inflamed than composed. Appius Claudius, who was naturally severe, and, by the hatred of the commons on the one hand, and praises of the senators on the other, was become quite infuriated, said, that these riots proceeded not from distress, but from licentiousness, that the people were rather wanton than violent, that this terrible mischief took its rise from the right of appeal, since threats, not authority, was all that belonged to the consuls, while permission was given to appeal to those who were accomplices in the crime. Come, added he, let us create a dictator from whom there lies no appeal. This madness, which hath set everything in a flame, will immediately subside. Let any one dare then to strike a lictor, when he shall know that his back, and even his life, are in the power of that person whose authority he has insulted. 30. To many the opinion of Appius appeared, as it really was, severe and violent. On the other hand, those of Virginius and Largius were not safe for the precedent they established. Especially they thought that of Largius so, as it would destroy all credit. The opinion of Virginius was reckoned to be most moderate, and a happy medium between the other two. But through the spirit of faction and a regard of private interest, which always have and always will obstruct the public councils, Appius prevailed, and was himself near being created dictator, which step would certainly have alienated the commons at this most dangerous juncture, when the Volsci, the Equi, and the Sabines happened to be all in arms at the same time. But the consuls and elder senators took care that this office, in its own nature uncontrollable, should be committed to a man of moderate temper. They choose Manius Valerus, son of Valesus, dictator. The people, though they saw that this magistrate was created against themselves, yet as they had got the right of appeal by his brother's law, dreaded nothing oppressive or tyrannical from that family. An edict of the dictators, which was almost the same with that published by the consul Servilius, afterwards confirmed their minds. But judging it safer to confide in both the man and in the absolute power with which he was vested, they gave in their names, desisting from all contest. 10 legions were levied, a greater army than had ever been raised before. Each of the consuls had 3 legions assigned him, and the dictator commanded 4. Nor could the war be deferred any longer. The Equi had made incursions upon the Latin territory. The deputies of the Latins begged the Senate either to send them assistance, or to allow them to arm themselves for the purpose of defending their own frontiers. It seemed safer that the Latins should be defended without arming, than to allow them to take up arms again. Wherefore Vitusius the consul was sent to their assistance. This immediately put a stop to the devastations. The Equi retired from the plains, and depending more on the advantage of the ground than on their arms, secured themselves on the summits of the mountains. The other consul, having marched against the Volsci, in order that he too might not waste time, challenged the enemy to pitch their camp nigh to his, and to risk an engagement by ravaging their lands. Both armies stood in order of battle before their lines in a plain between the 2 camps. The Volsci had considerably the advantage in number. Accordingly they rushed on to the fight, in a careless manner, and as if contemptuously. The Roman consul neither advanced his forces, and not suffering the enemy's shouts to be returned, he ordered them to stand still with their spears fixed in the ground, and when the enemy came up, to draw their swords and fall upon them with all their force. The Volsci, wearied with running and shouting, set upon the Romans as if they had been quite benumbed through fear, but when they found the vigorous resistance that was made, and saw their swords glittering before their face, they turned their backs in great disorder, just as if they had fallen into an ambuscade. Nor had they strength sufficient even for flight, as they had advanced to the battle in full speed. The Romans, on the other hand, as they had not stirred from their ground in the beginning of the action, being fresh and vigorous, easily overtook the enemy, who were weary, took their camp by assault, and after driving them thence, pursued them to Velletri, into which the conquered and conquerors entered in a body. By the promiscuous slaughter which was here made of all ranks, there was more blood spilt than in the battle itself. Quarter was given to a small number of them, who threw down their arms and surrendered. 31. Whilst these things are going on among the Volsci, the dictator routs, puts to flight, and strips of their camp, the Sabines, where by far the most serious part of the war lay. By a charge of his cavalry he had thrown into confusion the centre of the enemy's line, where, by the wings extending themselves too far, they had not strengthened their line by a suitable depth of files. The infantry fell upon them in this confusion. By one and the same charge their camp was taken and the war concluded. There was no other battle in those times more memorable than this since the action at the Lake Regillus. The dictator is borne into the city in triumph. Besides the usual honours, a place in the circus was assigned to him and his descendants to see the public games. A curule chair was fixed in that place. The lands of Velletri were taken from the conquered Volsci. Colonists were sent from the city to Velletri, and a colony planted there. Soon after there was an engagement with the Equi, but contrary to the wish of the consul, because they had to approach the enemy by disadvantageous ground. But the soldiers complaining that the war was on purpose spun out, that the dictator might resign his office before they returned home to the city, and so his promises might fall to the ground without effect, as those of the consul had done before, forced him at all hazards to march his army up the hill. This imprudent step, by the cowardice of the enemy, turned out successfully. For before the Romans came within reach of a dart, the Equi, quite amazed at their boldness, abandoned their camp, which was situated in a very strong position, and ran down into the valleys on the opposite side. In it abundance of booty was found, and the victory was a bloodless one. Matters being thus successfully managed in war in 3 different directions, anxiety respecting the event of their domestic differences had left neither the senators nor the people. With such powerful influence, and with such art also, had the moneylenders made their arrangements, so as to disappoint not only the people, but even the dictator himself. For Valerus, after the return of the consul Vitusius, first of all matters brought before the Senate that relating to the victorious people, and proposed the question, what it was their determination should be done with respect to those confined for debt. And when this motion was rejected, I am not acceptable, says he, as an adviser of concord. You will ere long wish, depend on it, that the commons of Rome had patrons similar to me. For my part, I will neither further disappoint my fellow citizens, nor will I be dictator to no purpose. Intestine dissensions, foreign wars, caused the Republic to require such a magistrate. Peace has been secured abroad, it is impeded at home. I will be a witness to disturbance as a private citizen rather than as dictator. Then quitting the Senate House, he abdicated his dictatorship. The case appeared to the commons that he had resigned his office indignant at the treatment shown to them. Accordingly, as if his engagements to them had been fully discharged, since it had not been his fault that they were not made good, they attended him when returning to his home with approbation and applause. 32. Fear then seized the senators lest, if the army should be dismissed, secret meetings and conspiracies would be renewed. Wherefore, though the Livy had been held by the dictator, yet supposing that, as they had sworn obedience to the consuls, the soldiers were bound by their oath, under the pretext of hostilities being renewed by the Equi, they ordered the legions to be led out of the city, by which proceeding the sedition was hastened. And it is said that at first it was in contemplation to put the consuls to death, that they might be discharged from their oath, but that being afterwards informed that no religious obligation could be dissolved by a criminal act, they, by the advice of one Sicinius, retired, without the orders of the consuls, to the sacred mount, beyond the river Anio, 3 miles from the city. This account is more general than that which Piso has given, that the secession was made to the Aventine. There without any leader, their camp being fortified with a rampart and trench, remaining quiet, taking nothing but what was necessary for sustenance, they kept themselves for several days, neither being attacked, nor attacking others. Great was the panic in the city, and through mutual fear all was suspense. The people left in the city dreaded the violence of the senators dreaded the people remaining in the city, uncertain whether they should prefer them to stay or to depart. But how long would the multitude which had seceded remain quiet? What were to be the consequences then, if, in the meantime, any foreign war should break out? They certainly considered no hope left, save in the concord of the citizens. This should be restored to the state by fair or by unfair means. It was resolved, therefore, that there should be sent as ambassador to the people Menenius Agrippa, an eloquent man, and one who was a favourite with the people, because he derived his origin from them. He, being admitted into the camp, is said to have related to them merely the following story in that antiquated and uncouth style. At a time when all the parts in the human body did not, as now, agree together, but the several members had each its own scheme, its own language, the other parts, indignant that everything was procured for the belly by their care, labor, and service, that the belly, remaining quiet in the center, did nothing but enjoy the pleasures afforded it. They conspired, accordingly, that the hand should not convey food to the mouth, nor the mouth receive it when presented, nor the teeth chew it. Whilst they wished under the influence of this feeling to subdue the belly by famine, the members themselves and the entire body were reduced to the last degree of emaciation. Thence it became apparent that the service of the belly was by no means a slothful one, that it did not so much receive nourishment as supply it, sending to all parts of the body this blood by which we live and possess vigor, distributed equally to the veins when perfected by the digestion of the food. By comparing in this way how similar the intestine sedition of the body was to the resentment of the people against the senators, he made an impression on the minds of the multitude. 33. Then a commencement was made to treat of a reconciliation, and among the conditions it was allowed, that the commons should have their own magistrates, with inviolable privileges, who should have the power of bringing assistance against the consuls, and that it should not be lawful for any of the patricians to hold that office. Thus 2 tribunes of the commons were created, Caius Licinius and Lucius Albinus. These created 3 colleagues for themselves. It is clear that among these was Sicinius, the adviser of the sedition. With respect to 2, who they were is not so clear. There are some who say that only 2 tribunes were elected on the Sacred Mount, and that there the devoting law was passed. During the secession of the commons, Spurius Cassius and Postumus Cominius entered on the consulship. During their consulate, the treaty with the Latin states was concluded. To ratify this, one of the consuls remained at Rome, the other being sent to the Volscian war, routs and puts to flight the Volscians of Antium, and continuing his pursuit of them, now that they were driven into the town of Longula, he takes possession of the town. Next he took Pelusca, also belonging to the Volscians. Then he attacked Corioli with all his force. There was then in the camp, among the young noblemen, Gaius Marcius, a youth distinguished both for intelligence and courage, who afterwards attained the cognomen of Coriolanus. When, as the Roman army was besieging Corioli, and was wholly intent on the townspeople, whom they kept shut up, without any apprehension of war threatening from without, the Volscian legion, setting out from Antium, suddenly attacked them, and, at the same time the enemy sallied forth from the town, Marcius happened to be on guard. He with a chosen body of men not only repelled the attack of those who had sallied out, but boldly rushed in through the open gate, and having cut down all in the part of the city nearest him, and having hastily seized some fire, threw it in the houses adjoining to the wall. Upon this the shouts of the townsmen mingling with the wailings of the women and children, occasioned by the first fright, as is usual, both increased the courage of the Romans, and dispirited the Volscians, seeing the city captured to the relief of which they had come. Thus the Volsci of Antium were defeated, the town of Corioli was taken. And so much did Marcius by his valour eclipse the reputation of the consul, that had not the treaty concluded with the Latins by Spurius Cassius alone, because his colleague was absent, served as a memorial of it, it would have been forgotten that Postumus Cominius had conducted the war with the Volscians. The same year dies Agrippa Menenius, a man during all his life equally a favourite with the senators and commons, still more indeed to the commons after the secession. To this man, the mediator and umpire in restoring concord among his countrymen, the ambassador of the senators to the commons, the person who brought back the commons to the city, were wanting the expenses of his funeral. The people buried him by the contribution of a sextans from each person. 34. Titus Geganius and Publius Minucius were next elected consuls. In this year, when everything was quiet from war abroad, and the dissensions were healed at home, another much more serious evil fell upon the state. First, a scarcity of provisions, in consequence of the lands lying until during the secession of the commons, then a famine such as befalls those who are besieged. And it would have ended in the destruction of the slaves at least, and indeed some of the commons also, had not the consuls adopted precautionary measures, by sending persons in every direction to buy up corn, not only into Etruria on the coast to the right of Ostia, and through the Volscians along the coast on the left as far as Cumas, but into Sicily also, in quest of it. So far had the hatred of their neighbours obliged them to stand in need of aid from distant countries. When corn had been bought up at Cumae, The ships were detained in lieu of the property of the Tarquinii by the tyrant Aristodemus, who was their heir. Among the Volsci and in the Pomptine territory it could not even be purchased. The corn dealers themselves incurred danger from the violence of the inhabitants. Corn came from Etruria by the Tiber. By means of this the people were supported. Amid this distressing scarcity they would have been harassed by a very inconvenient war, had not a dreadful pestilence attacked the Volsci when about to commence hostilities. The minds of the enemy being alarmed by this calamity, so that they were influenced by some terror, even after it had abated, the Romans both augmented the number of their colonists at Velletri, and dispatched a new colony to the mountains of Norba, to serve as a barrier in the Pomptine district. Then in the consulship of Marcus Minucius and A. Sempronius, a great quantity of corn was imported from Sicily, and it was debated in the Senate at what rate it should be given to the commons. Many were of opinion that the time was come for putting down the commons, and for recovering those rights which had been wrested from the senators by secession and violence. In particular, Marcius Coriolanus, an enemy to tribunician power, says, if they desire the former rate of provisions, let them restore to the senators their former rights. Why do I, after being sent under the yoke, after being, as it were, ransomed from robbers, behold plebeian magistrates, and Sicinius invested with power? Shall I submit to these indignities longer than is necessary? Shall I, who would not have endured King Tarquin, tolerate Sicinius? Let him now secede, let him call away the commons. The road lies open to the sacred mount and to other hills. Let them carry off the corn from our lands, as they did 3 years since. Let them have the benefit of that scarcity which in their frenzy they have occasioned. I will venture to say, that, brought to their senses by these sufferings, they will themselves become tillers of the lands, rather than, taking up arms and seceding, they would prevent them from being tilled. It is not so easy to say whether it should have been done, as I think that it might have been practicable for the senators, on the condition of lowering the price of provisions, to have rid themselves of both the tribunician power and all the restraints imposed on them against their will. 35. This proposal both appeared to the Senate too harsh, and from exasperation well nigh drove the people to arms, that they were now assailed with famine, as if enemies, that they were defrauded of food and sustenance, that the foreign corn, the only support which fortune unexpectedly furnished to them, was being snatched from their mouth, unless the tribunes were given up in chains to Gaius Marcius, unless he glut his rage on the backs of the commons of Rome. That in him a new executioner had started up, who ordered them to die or be slaves. An assault would have been made on him as he left the Senate house, had not the tribunes very opportunely appointed him a day for trial. By this their rage was suppressed, every one saw himself become the judge, the arbiter of the life and death of his foe. At first Marcius heard the threats of the tribunes with contempt, that the right to afford aid, not to inflict punishment, had been granted to that office, that they were tribunes of the commons and not of the senators. But the commons had risen with such violent determination, that the senators were obliged to extricate themselves from danger by the punishment of one. They resisted, however, in spite of popular odium, and employed, each individual his own powers, and all those of the entire order. And first, the trial was made whether they could upset the affair, by posting their clients in several places, by deterring individuals from attending meetings and cabals. Then they all proceeded in a body. You would suppose that all the senators were on their trial, earnestly entreating the commons, that if they would not acquit as innocent, they would at least pardon as guilty, one citizen, one senator. As he did not attend on the day appointed, they persevered in their resentment. Being condemned in his absence, he went into exile to the Volsci, threatening his country, and even then breathing all the resentment of an enemy. The Volsci received him kindly on his arrival, and treated him still more kindly every day in proportion as his resentful feelings toward his countrymen became more striking, and one time frequent complaints, another time threats were heard. He lodged with Attius Tullus. He was then the chief man of the Volscian people, and always a determined enemy of the Romans. Thus, when old animosity stimulated the one, recent resentment the other, they concert schemes for bringing about a war with Rome. They did not at once believe that their people could be persuaded to take up arms, so often unsuccessfully tried. That by the many frequent wars, and lastly, by the loss of their youth in the pestilence, their spirits were now broken, that they must have recourse to art, in a case where animosity had become blunted from length of time, that their feelings might become exasperated by some fresh cause of resentment. 36. It happened that preparations were being made at Rome for a repetition of the great games. The cause of repeating them was this: on the morning of the games, the show not yet being commenced, a master of a family, after flogging his slave loaded with a neck-yoke, had driven him through the middle of the circus. After this the games were commenced, as if that circumstance bore no relation to religion. Not long after it, Atinius, a plebeian, had a dream. Jupiter seemed to him to say that the person who danced previous to the games had displeased him, unless these games were renewed on a splendid scale, that the city would be in danger, that he should go and announce these things to the consuls. Though his mind was not altogether free from superstitious feelings, his respectful awe of the dignity of the magistrates overcame his religious fear, lest he might pass into the mouths of people as a laughing-stock. This delay cost him dear, for he lost his son within a few days, and lest the cause of this sudden calamity should be doubtful, that same phantom, presenting itself to him sorrowful in mind, seemed to ask him whether he had received a sufficient requital for his contempt of the deity, that a still heavier one awaited him, unless he went immediately and delivered the message to the consuls. The matter was now still more pressing. Hesitating, however, and delaying, he was at length overtaken by a severe stroke of disease, a sudden paralysis. Then indeed the anger of the gods aroused him. Wearied out therefore by his past sufferings and by those threatening him, having convened a meeting of his friends, after he had detailed to them all he had seen and heard, and Jupiter's having so often presented himself to him in his sleep, the threats and anger of heaven realized in his own calamities, by the unhesitating assent of all who were present he is conveyed in a litter into the forum to the consuls, from thence being conveyed into the senate house, after he had stated those same particulars to the senators. To the great surprise of all, behold another miracle. He who had been conveyed into the senate house deprived of the use of all his limbs, is recorded to have returned home on his own feet after he discharged his duty. 37. The Senate decreed that the games should be celebrated on as grand a scale as possible. To these games a great number of Volscians came by the advice of Attius Tullus. Before the games were commenced, Tullus, as had been concerted at home with Marcius, comes to the consuls. He tells them that there were matters on which he wished to treat with them in private concerning the commonwealth. All witnesses being removed, he says, with reluctance I say that of my countrymen which is rather disparaging. I do not however come to allege against them anything as having been committed by them, but to guard against their committing anything. The minds of our people are far more fickle than I could wish. We have felt that by many disasters, seeing that we are still preserved, not through our own deserts, but through your forbearance. There is now here a great multitude of Volscians. The games are going on, the city will be intent on the exhibition. I remember what has been committed in this city on a similar occasion by the youth of the Sabines. My mind shudders lest anything should be committed inconsiderately and rashly. I considered that these matters should be mentioned beforehand to you, consuls. With regard to myself, it is my determination to depart hence home immediately, lest, if present, I may be affected by the contagion of any word or deed. Having said this, he departed. When the consuls laid before the Senate the matter, doubtful with respect to proof, though from credible authority, the authority more than the thing itself, as usually happens, urged them to adopt even needless precautions, and a decree of the Senate being passed, that the Volscians should quit the city, criers are sent in different directions to order them all to depart before night. A great panic struck them at first as they ran about to their lodgings to carry away their effects. Afterwards, when setting out, indignation arose in their breasts, that they, as if polluted with crime and contaminated, were driven away from the games, on festival days, from the converse in a manner of men and gods. 38. As they went along in an almost continuous body, Tullus having preceded them to the fountain of Ferentina, accosting the chiefs among them according as each arrived, by asking questions and expressing indignation, he led both themselves, who greedily listened to language congenial to their angry feelings, and threw them, the rest of the multitude, into a plain adjoining to the road. There having commenced an address after the manner of a public harangue, he says, "Though you were to forget the former ill treatment of the Roman people and the calamities of the nation of the Volsci, and all other such matters, with what feelings do you bear this outrage offered you today, whereon they have commenced their games by insulting us? Have you not felt that a triumph has been had over you this day? That you, when departing, were a spectacle to all, citizens, foreigners, so many neighboring states? That your wives, your children were exhibited before the eyes of men? What do you suppose to have been the sentiments of those who heard the voice of the crier? What of those who saw you departing? What of those who met this ignominious cavalcade? What, except that we are identified with some enormous guilt by which we should profane the games, and render an expiation necessary, that for this reason we are driven away from the residences of these pious people, from their converse and meeting? What, does it not strike you that we still live because we hastened our departure? If this is a departure and not a flight, and do you not consider this to be the city of enemies, where if you had delayed a single day, you must have all died? War has been declared against you, to the heavy injury of those who declared it, if you are men. Thus, being both already charged with resentment and incited by this harangue, they went severally to their homes, and by instigating each his own state, they succeeded in making the entire Volscian nation revolt. 39. The generals selected for that war by the unanimous choice of all the states were Attius Tullus and Caius Marcius, in the latter of whom their chief hope was reposed. And this hope he by no means disappointed, so that it clearly appeared that the Roman commonwealth was more powerful by reason of its generals than its army. Having marched to Circeii, he expelled from thence the Roman colonists, and delivered that city in a state of freedom to the Volscians. From thence, passing across the country through by-roads into the Latin way, he deprived the Romans of their recently acquired towns, Satricum, Longula, Pelusca, Corioli. He next retook Lavinium. He then took in succession Corbaio, Vitellia, Trebia, Lavici, and Pedum. Lastly, he marches from Pedum to the city, and having pitched his camp at the Cluilian trenches 5 miles from the city, he from thence ravages the Roman territory, guards being sent among the devastators to preserve the lands of the patricians intact, whether as being incensed chiefly against the plebeians, or in order that dissension might arise between the senators and the people. And this certainly would have arisen, so powerfully did the tribunes, by inveighing against the leading men of the state, incite the plebeians, already sufficiently violent of themselves. But their apprehensions of the foe, the strongest bond of concord, united their minds, distrustful and rancorous though they were. The only matter not agreed on was this, that the Senate and consuls rested their hopes on nothing else than on arms. The plebeians preferred anything to war. Spurius Nautius and Sextus Furius were now consuls. Whilst they were reviewing the legions, posting guards along the walls and other places where they had determined that there should be posts and watches, a vast multitude of persons demanding peace terrified them first by their seditious clamour, then compelled them to convene the Senate to consider the question of sending ambassadors to Gaius Marcius. The Senate entertained the question, when it became evident that the spirits of the plebeians were giving way, and ambassadors being sent to Marcius concerning peace, brought back a harsh answer, if their lands were restored to the Volscians, that they might then consider the question of peace, if they were disposed to enjoy the plunder of war at their ease, that he, mindful both of the injurious treatment of his countrymen, as well as of the kindness of strangers, would do his utmost to make. It appeared that his spirit was irritated by exile, not crushed. When the same persons are sent back a second time, they are not admitted into the camp. It is recorded that the priests also, arrayed in their insignia, went as suppliants to the enemy's camp, and that they did not influence his mind more than the ambassadors. 40. Then the matrons assemble in a body around Veturia, the mother of Coriolanus, and his wife, Volumnia. Whether that was the result of public counsel or of the women's fear, I cannot ascertain. They certainly carried their point that Veturia, a lady advanced in years, and Volumnia, leading her 2 sons by Marcius, should go into the camp of the enemy, and that women should defend by entreaties and tears a city which men were unable to defend by arms. When they reached the camp, and it was announced to Coriolanus that a great body of women were approaching, he, who had been moved neither by the majesty of the state in its ambassadors, nor by the sanctity of religion so strikingly addressed to his eyes and understanding in its priests, was much more obdurate against the women's tears. Then one of his acquaintances, who recognized Veturia, distinguished from all the others by her sadness, standing between her daughter-in-law and grandchildren, says, "Unless my eyes deceive me, your mother, children, and wife are approaching." When Coriolanus, almost like one bewildered, rushing in consternation from his seat, offered to embrace his mother as she met him, the lady, turning from entreaties to angry rebuke, says, "Before I receive your embrace, let me know whether I have come to an enemy or to a son, whether I am in your camp a captive or a mother. Has length of life and a hapless old age reserved me for this, to behold you an exile, then an enemy? Could you lay waste this land, which gave you birth and nurtured you? Though you had come with an incensed and vengeful mind, did not your resentment subside when you entered its frontiers? When Rome came within view, did it not occur to you, within these walls my house and guardian gods are, my mother, wife, and children? So then, had I not been a mother, Rome would not be besieged. Had I not a son, I might have died free in a free country. But I can now suffer nothing that is not more discreditable to you than distressing to me, nor however wretched I may be, shall I be so long. Look to these, whom, if you persist, either an untimely death or lengthened slavery awaits." Then his wife and children embraced him, and the lamentation proceeding from the entire crowd of women, and their bemoaning themselves and their country, at length overcame the man. Then, after embracing his family, he sends them away. He moved his camp farther back from the city. Then, after he had drawn off his troops from the Roman territory, they say that he lost his life, overwhelmed by the odium of the proceeding. Different writers say by different modes of death. I find in Fabius, far the most ancient writer, that he lived even to old age. He states positively that advanced in years he made use of this phrase, that exile bore much heavier on the old man. The men of Rome were not remiss in awarding their praises to the women, so truly did they live without detracting from the merit of others. A temple was built also and dedicated to female fortune, to serve as a monument. The Volscians afterwards returned in conjunction with the Equi into the Roman territory, but the Equi would no longer have Attius Tullus as their leader, hence from dispute whether the Volscians or the Equi should give a general to the allied army, a sedition, and afterwards a furious battle arose. There the good fortune of the Roman people destroyed the two armies of the enemy, by a contest no less bloody than obstinate. Titus Livius and Gaius Aquilius were made consuls. The Volsci fell as a province to Secessions, the Hernici, for they too were in arms, to Aquilius. That year the Hernici were defeated. They came off with respect to the Volscians on equal terms. Classics in Audiobook is dedicated to promoting free learning about the ancient world. If you have enjoyed this audiobook, please consider supporting the channel in one or more of the following ways.